Today we will discuss about the static and non-static constructor. This is the final and last video regarding constructor. Okay, today we will discuss static and non-static constructor. So static versus non-static constructor. If constructor constructor with static modifier defined is known as static constructor. If constructor with a static modifier defined is known as static constructor. Like we have added a class constructor demo, and in constructor demo I have declared a constructor but static modifier. I have defined a constructor with a static modifier that is known as static constructor, and this one non-static constructor. Okay, if the constructor explicitly defined with a static modifier, if the constructor defined with a static modifier, that is called a static constructor. Okay, if the constructor is explicitly defined and with a static modifier, then this is a static constructor, and this is non-static constructor. Okay. How it will work? Static constructor and non-static constructor. How it work? I have created a constructor demo class. In this, we have a static constructor, and this is non-static constructor. We have a entry point main method. In this main method, suppose we have nothing, and execute this one, then what will happen? Just put it static constructor is called, and here the static constructor, non-static constructor is called. Okay. Suppose I have run this one, then what will happen? Static constructor is called. Okay. This is given, static constructor is called. Then what we are getting means this is the entry point. If this entry point is not available, so someone says that this one is called first, means the static constructor is called. Okay, Then what is the need of main method? Main method is not there is nothing in main method, and firstly it is called. But why the need of main method? Each and every class for the execution we require main method, and this is the entry point. If this commented and run, then what will happen? This have some error. I commented this one. Yeah. Constructor demo does not have a suitable static main method. Okay. When I run this, then it shows previous result. When I have build, then it show there are constructor demo does not have a suitable main method. Main method is the entry point. So each and every class to run, the main method is required. Okay. So on command is the main method is entry point. The execution pointer come here at the main method and just go back and execute the static constructor. After that, came here and execute whatever available in the main method. That means static constructor is immediately called when the class is executed or class class is executed or run. A static constructor is immediately called when the class is executed. And what about if constructor with a static modifier defined is known as a static constructor? Okay. And the same line you can put for non-static constructor. If a constructor with a constructor defined with a constructor defined without is known as without if a constructor defined without static modifier modifier is known as constructor only, non-static constructor. Okay, non-static. If constructor with if constructor with defined with sorry if constructor defined with static modifier is known as static constructor. If constructor defined without static modifier is known as non-static constructor. Okay. And a static constructor is immediately called when the class is executed. And what about non-static constructor? Non-static constructor is called when the instance is created. and it is called whenever instance is created, non-static constructor is called. That means static constructor immediately called when the class is executed, and this is called only one time in class execution life cycle. What does it mean? Static constructor is immediately called when the class is executed. Okay. When this class is executed, this static constructor is called. When I click here, the static constructor is called. The static constructor is called. Okay. Static constructor immediately called when the class is executed, and this called only one time in class execution life cycle. What does it mean by class execution life cycle? Class execution life cycle means this class execution started from here and end here. This is the class execution life cycle. This class execution started from here and end here. Okay, and this is the class execution life cycle. In the whole class life execution cycle, the static constructor is called only one time. Okay, a non-static constructor is called when the instance is created, and it is called whenever instance is created. Non-static constructor is called. That means non-static constructor is called whenever the instance is created. If how many instances? Suppose two instances created, then two times non-static constructor is called. The static constructor is called in whole class life execution cycle only one time. Is maximum and minimum only one time the static constructor is called. But this constructor means non-static constructor is called minimum called is 0 and maximum called is n. Suppose if there is no instance is created, if the instance is not created, the instance is not created, the non-static constructor is not called. Okay, that means non-static constructor is called 0 times. If the one instance is created, then one time call. If the two instance is created, then two times call. Like suppose I'm creating instance constructor demo d1 equal to new constructor demo, this one. I'm creating the instance one time. Previously I have doesn't create the instance of the class, then this non-static constructor is not called. Only static constructor is called. Okay, when I creating instance one time, then one time non-static constructor will be called. That's why I'm saying that non-static constructor is minimum call 0 times. Means if the no instance is created, then 0 times it is non-static constructor is called. When I have created the instance one time, then one time non-static constructor is called. But each and every cases, static constructor is called only one time in whole life cycle class execution life cycle, this static constructor is called only one times. That is maximum and minimum only one time. But here in the case of non-static constructor, the minimum the minimum execution time or minimum calling time is 0. So sorry, for non-static constructor 0. Suppose we are not creating the instance of the static instance of the class, then the static constructor will not be called. Okay, that is minimum call is 0 and maximum call n, means n type of n times instance is created, then n times the non-static constructor will be called. Currently we have created one instance of the class, then one time non-static constructor will be called. Now what happened? Static constructor is called only one times. A non-static constructor now is called one time. Why one time? Because one instance is created. Previously I doesn't create any instance. Suppose I have commented this one, then 0 times a static constructor is called. And that's why I'm saying that minimum for non-static constructor 0, minimum calling time is 0 and maximum n. When I commented this one, then only static constructor will be called. Static constructor is called. And when I created two instance, that is d2, and two times it's called. Static constructor will call one time. Static constructor is called one time. Non-static constructor is called two times. And when I created third instance of the class d3, then three times the non-static constructor will be called. The static constructor is called only one time, and we have created three instances of the class. The non-static constructor is called three times. That's why I am saying that how many times instance is created, that times static non-static constructor is called. Suppose we are creating n instance of the class, then n times non-static constructor will be called. For static constructor, in whole class execution life cycle, it will be called only one times. Okay, that's why I have written here non-static constructor is called when the instance is created, and it is called when ever instance is created, non-static constructor is called. Okay, static constructor static constructor is used, basically constructor, why constructor are used? Basically constructor are used to initialize the class variable. Here we have class variable int x. Suppose we have static variable int x and non-static variable y. We have two variables, two types of variable. One x is a static variable, or and y is non-static variable. Okay, basically constructor is used to initialize the data members. The data members, or we can say variables of a class, or we can also say fields of a class. Constructor basically used to initialize the variable of a class or field of a class. But in which case which constructor is used. Okay, static constructor is used to ini- initialize. Static constructor is used to initialize the static variable. Static variables or fields. Static constructor is used to initialize the static variables are filled, whereas non-static non-static constructor is used to initialize non-static variables or fields. Static constructor static constructor is used to initialize the static variable fields, whereas non-static constructor is used to initialize the non-static variable fields. Okay, here static variable. This is a static variable int x, and this int x is initialized by static constructor, and this non-static variable y is initialized by non-static constructor. Non-static constructor is used to initialize non-static variable or fields, and static constructor are used to initialize static variable or fields. Okay, what are the by this x this x is initialized by this static constructor, because this x means this variable is of static type. So static constructor is initialized. By default, this x value is 0. This is initialized by 0. Default value is 0. X default value is 0 because it's integer type, and so the static constructor initialize this by default value is 0, and this int y is also integer type, so that's why its also default value is 0, but initialized by non-static constructor. This y value is initialized by this non-static constructor, and this x value is initialized by static constructor because the x is of type static, and this y is of type non-static. Okay, suppose we are printing the value of x here, then what will print? The value of x is initialized by a static constructor because that is of type static, and that is initialized by 0. Okay, and when we try to access, just print here below, and when we try to print the value of y, then what happen? It's giving object reference require non-static field method property constructor demo y. Why is giving error? Because This is non-static. This is non-static. And non-static members are initialized by non-static constructor, this one. And this is initialized when the instance is created. When the instance is created. Okay. When the instance is created, then this non-static constructor is called. Why this is initialized? Because why this is initialized? Because this X is of static type and this static constructor is responsible for initialize this one. And this static constructor is called implicitly. This static constructor is called implicitly. We are not calling the static constructor. It is implicitly called. Okay. This static constructor is implicitly called and initialize this variable x. Static constructor is implicitly called, whereas non-static constructor must be explicitly called. Static constructor is implicitly called, okay, whereas non-static constructor must be explicitly called. We need to, it must to call non-static constructor explicitly, but static constructor is implicitly called. That's why static constructor is implicitly called, and this static constructor, the static field is initialized by the value 0 because this is integer type. This is implicitly called, and we can't because the static constructor is implicitly called, so we can't pass the value here. Okay, we can't pass the value here because of we have two reasons. We can't pass value in a static constructor. Why we can't pass value in a static constructor? Because it is implicitly called. It is implicitly called. We are not calling explicitly. So how we can pass the value in this? It is called by the compiler. So we are not calling this static constructor. Okay, that's why we can't pass the value here. This is the reason this static constructor by default this is parameterless. Because of this reason, this is implicitly called. Compiler is called by this static constructor. Programmer is not called this static constructor, and due to the compiler calling, programmer can't assign pass this argument. In this constructor, programmer cannot pass the argument. Due to implicit calling, we can't pass the parameter or arguments. Okay, that is why the static constructor is parameterless, and because of parameterless, we can't overload static constructor. Because in to overload to overload any method, we require some parameter. Okay, suppose we have some parameter, then number of parameter, order of parameter, and type of parameter we can overload. And a static constructor, there is no arguments. This is parameterless. Because of parameterless, this static constructor cannot be overloaded, right? And static constructor is called implicitly. That's why this static variable initialized by this static constructor, and the default value for integer, that is 0. But in case of y, This is non-static variable, and non-static variable is assigned initialized by the non-static constructor, and the non-static constructor is called explicitly by the programmer. It is called whenever I have created this instance, then this non-static constructor is called. Okay. Then we are creating the instance of three times. The three times non-static constructor is called, and three copies of this y, because this y is a non-static variable. That's why this y have three copy for each and every instant. This maintain three copy, and we are just putting y. So there is some confusion. We have three copies of y, then which copy you want to access? That's why it has some error. For instance, d1 we have one copy of y. For instance, this d2 we have another copy of y. For instance, d3 we have another copy of y. So, and here we are accessing just y. So compiler confused which copy of y you want to call. That's why. Okay. And this static variable have a single copy that is maintained in whole class. That's why we can access. Static variable can be directly called in a static block. This main is a static block, and this is a static variable. Okay, that's why we have called directly. Okay, and this static variable have a single copy, because this static constructor is called only one times in the execution life cycle of the class. This is the single copy, and only one time is called. Static constructor is only one time call, and this maintains single copy. That's why we directly access x. But in the case of y, we have it depend on the instance is created, three times created, three separate copy of y is maintained. So we can't directly access this y, because there is some confusion which y you want to access. And when we want to access d1 copy, then d1 dot y you need to put here. Okay, and just we need to separate d1 d2 dot y and plus plus d3 dot y, d1 dot y, and here we need to use plus d2 dot y and d3 dot y. Each and every, here x is x default value is initialized by static constructor, because static variable the default value is 0. Here y also is integer type, and that is default value initialized by non-static constructor, that is 0. So in d1 copy, d2 copy, d3 copy, each and every copy that is 0. So when I run this one, then each and every instance of class, the y value is 0, and this x is 0. Here 0 0 0. Okay, now in a static constructor is parameterless. Okay, and already you know why this is parameterless, because this static constructor is implicitly called already when made in no static constructor is implicitly called, whereas non-static constructor must be explicitly called. Okay, because of explicitly called, this is implicitly called, so we can't pass the parameter. That's why static constructor is parameterless, and if the parameter static constructor is parameterless, that's why we can't overload the static constructor. But in the case of non-static constructor, because non-static constructor is called by the programmer, that is explicitly called, so we can pass the parameter, and we can also overload the non-static constructor. Okay, so I we have use a parameterized constructor, this one, to initialize y value, and here I have passed the y value, this dot y equal to y. This is local variable, and this dot y refers to the field variable, class variable. Okay, and here when we creating the instance of the class constructor demo, then we are just calling the constructor here. We are calling the constructor here. We are calling the constructor explicitly. Okay, that's why we can pass the value here. Suppose we are passing 10, 10, 20, and 30. The we can also here explore the different copies concept, because each and every instance maintains separate copy of y. Then d1 instance have separate copy of y that have 10, and d2 instance that have separate copy of y that hold value 20. Each and every instance have separate copy of y and have a different value. Previously default value, that is 000, but I have passed explicitly 10, 20, and 30. So d1 dot y will be 10, and d2 dot y will be 20, and d3 dot y will be 30. Here you can see separate copy of y. Now the static constructor is implicitly called, whereas non-static constructor must be explicitly called. Okay. Suppose in class there is no, or we can say each and every class have non-static constructor except static class. Each and every class, each and every class have non-static constructor except static class. What does it mean by static class? If we declare a class with a static modifier, if we declare a class, if we declare a class with a static modifier, if we declare a class test, like test with static modifier, if a class declare test with a static modifier, then each and every members in this class are static type. Okay, all members members must be of static type. Okay, suppose we have define a class test with a static modifier, then all members must be of static type. That's why here I have mentioned each and every class have a non-static constructor except static class, because this is a static class. Then in the static class, non-static constructor cannot have. The static class cannot have non-static constructor because all members must be static type in static class. Okay, except is static. That's why I'm saying except a static class. Each and every class have non-static constructor except static class. Okay, each and every class have non-static constructor except static class. And also each and every class have non-static constructor except static class. That means if you define any class except static class, each and every class have non-static constructor. If the constructor is defined by the programmer explicitly, then no problem. Otherwise, if the programmer not defined the constructor explicitly, then implicit constructor is available. Okay. Static constructor, non-static constructor, and you also know the static constructor are used to initialize the static data members. Non-static constructor are used to initialize non-static data members, and this is called first. This is the first block of the calling. Okay, and static constructor is called one time in all execution life cycle of the class, and this non-static constructor is called zero or n times regarding instance. If the instance of the class is not created anytime, then this non-static constructor will not called zero times. If the n times non-static instance is created of the n times class instance is created, then n times the non-static constructor is called. And these all are the differences between static and non-static constructor. If any confusion or anything else I have missed, then you can comment and ask me if anything I missed. Okay, that's all. Thank you. Tomorrow I will make another video regarding what is the difference between variables and instance variables and reference variable. These are, I will continue the videos regarding these C# topics. Okay, that's all. Thank you.